Well, good evening, everyone. This is Les Smith. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. It is my pleasure to be here as your host this evening. We are here for the information session on the Wolverine Groundwater Investigation and Response Activity Plans. Before we get into our presentations this evening, I would like to make a couple of brief introductions. We have two presenters this evening. We have Karen Vorse with the EGLE Remediation and Redevelopment Division, Grand Rapids District Office, and we have Mr. Mark Worrell from the Grand Rapids District Office as well. In a few moments, we'll hear from both of the presenters about the response activity plans. Tonight's information session will include a presentation on 4 response activity plans that were submitted by Wolverine worldwide. And following that, we will open up the session to questions and answers from you, the attendees. And we will also talk about other ways in which you can submit written comments concerning the response activity plans and who you can contact for further information. As with many of our EGLE webinars, all lines are muted during the webinar. If you have a question you would like to submit to the presenters or a panelist later this evening, you may submit your question using the go to webinar control panel and select the questions box, and you can type in your question there. We will be reading those questions out loud to the presenters this evening. Also, you may have an opportunity to also raise your hand, and I'll show you how to do that here in a couple of slides. And just so you know, we are recording the webinar, and the recording, copy of the recording will be made available in a few days. We post our webinars, the final versions, on the EGLE YouTube channel, and also copies will be made available in other locations as well. Those will be announced to you in a separate communication. How tonight's meeting will work, we talked about typing a question in the question box or any questions that you have concerning the response activity plans. Karen will provide you again with information on how to submit written comments. But on this slide here, you will see that there's a couple other avenues. There's the email address on the screen here. That's the eagle-rrd-housestreet@michigan.gov. And we have Karen Vorse's mailing address at the Grand Rapids District Office as another location for you to submit comments. If you're not familiar with the control panel for using the question box or raising your hand, there is a if you see the little red box with the white arrow in it, you can bring that out and you will see the list of options there, one of which is a question box. You can click the question box and it'll drop down and you can type in your question for the panelist. If you wish to raise your hand, you'll see a little hand with a green up arrow. If you click that, that means you're indicating that you wish to raise your hand. If for some reason you have raised your hand and you decided later you wish to lower your hand, it will show as a red down arrow, and that's how you would lower your hand. So to raise your hand, it's a green up arrow. To lower your hand, it's a red down arrow. And I'll come back to that later when we get to the question and answer session. And with that, I will pass the mic over to Karen Vorse from the EGLE Remediation Redevelopment Division's Grand Rapids office to have a discussion about the response activity plans.
Sounds good. Thanks, Les.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen now. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Also, who's going to be helping me present during this presentation also has his computer on there. That's Mark Worrell, the project geologist in North Kent County. And my name's Karen Vorse. I'm also the project manager and a geologist in Grand Rapids working on all things Wolverine, worldwide related. And tonight we're going to be going over the response activity plans that Wolverine submitted under the consent decree specifically for Area 5, Area 6, Area 11 and 12, and Area 19 of the North Kent study area. So we're going to kind of do a little recap for folks who may not be familiar with the consent decree and just kind of the history of this site, in case we have some people who are just joining us or watching online at a later date who are interested. Kind of the framework for all of the work that's occurring right now is based on the consent decree that was reached between the state of Michigan, Plainfield and Algoma Townships, and Wolverine Worldwide, which became effective on February 19th, 2020, earlier this year. The full document, consent decree, and all of the appendices can be found on our House Street website, which is michigan.gov/Belmont, spelled out. And like I said, this decree serves as a framework for future PFAS response activities performed by Wolverine in what's considered the North Kent study area. So on the slide, you'll see the outline of the study area. So anything that's inside of that study area is what the consent decree applies to. Anything outside of that is not included within the bounds of the consent decree. And so, as we've said before, this is a large area, roughly 20 up to 25 square miles. It goes as far north as 12 Mile Road, south down to the Grand River, east to downtown Rockford along the Rogue River, and then as far west, kind of bounded by Pine Island Drive. Previously, we did have a public comment period for the consent decree back in early February. And that's also posted on our Attorney General's website, as well as the responsiveness summary to public comments received during that public comment period. So just kind of a basic overview of what the requirements of the consent decree really put into place that Wolverine must conduct. In the consent decree, if you look at it, Section 6 discusses municipal water expansion, which is currently underway, continued filter operation and maintenance, residential drinking water well resampling and filter areas, source control at the tannery site in downtown Rockford, as well as source control at the House Street disposal site in Belmont. And today, what we're here for is to talk about the groundwater investigations that are required, specifically under Section 7.9 of the consent decree, and also discussed in Appendix P and Appendix R of the consent decree. And then also required under the decree is the groundwater surface water interface investigation, which was discussed in Section 7.10. So today's meeting will be covering those response activity plans specifically for Area 5, Area 6, Area 11 and 12, and Area 19 of the North Kent study area. And copies of this response activity plan, hard copies can be picked up and viewed at municipal offices. Plainfield Township, Algoma Township, and the city of Rockford all have hard copies of these 4 response activity plans, or it's also posted digitally on our House Street website, again at the www.michigan.gov/Belmont. So we kind of want to get everyone orientated here. So again, here we have the North Kent study area outlined in solid black. And within that, you'll see the municipal water parcels who will be hooked up to municipal water as part of the consent decree. Those are highlighted in a red. And homes that currently have existing municipal water already hooked up are highlighted in kind of a light blue along in here. But you'll see we've imposed the filter areas where we're going to be having additional groundwater investigation on this figure. So you'll see here in the south, kind of southern western portion, we have Area 5, which is considered a filter area, meaning we're going to have homes that will be using drinking water wells still in that area, as well as Area 6, highlighted in yellow, closer up to the House Street disposal site on the east side of US 131, moving down to areas what are called 11 and 12, just on the east side of the river, and then up into the northeast portion, which is called Area 19, also referred to as R1, but we'll just stick with Area 19 for ease of reference during this presentation. So basically, these 5 areas are going to require additional groundwater investigation because we want to make sure any contamination that is being addressed through municipal water connection of these homes is not migrating out or coming into Area 5, Area 6, Area 11, Area 12, and 19. Or if we do know there's contamination there, we need to have it fully defined and understood. Also important to note, and we'll make a note of this later, there's also filter operation and maintenance and residential resampling that's required in these areas as well, in addition to this groundwater investigation that's occurring. So in the consent decree, Appendix P, you'll find the statement of work specifically for Area 5, Area 6, and Areas 11 and 12. So kind of the areas south of 10 Mile, highlighted on this slide. And what Appendix P of the consent decree contained was just kind of the basic statement of work, which proposed the general approach for Wolverine's initial groundwater investigation for these areas. And that was attached to the consent decree and part of the public notice in February. Appendix R specifically relates to Area 19, which is north of 10 Mile. That was, again, Appendix R contained the statement of work specific to Area 19, which was attached to the consent decree. Area 19 is kind of bound between US 131 and the Rogue River, 11 Mile roughly to the south and 12 Mile to the north, just so we can have ourselves referenced throughout the presentation. So we wanted to kind of visually also just kind of show the difference between, okay, here's Appendix P and R, which had the general scope of work, and here's the response activity plans. Something that we wanted to make clear is that the proposed wells that are part of these response activity plans are kind of a first step wise approach. As you'll see on the next slide, the objectives of the consent decree are clear, what must be met. And so normally environmental investigations happen over different phases of investigation because you need to kind of get the initial set of wells in, stop, look at the data, figure out, okay, where do we need to step out and further define the contamination. So this isn't kind of like the end all be all. This is the only amount of wells that are going to be installed. It's kind of the first broad brush approach to get more site specific data to then inform the next decision making of where other wells will be placed. And so the initial proposed well locations were approved as part of the consent decree in Appendix P and R. However, in the response activity plans, things that we want you guys to comment on and to take a close look at, are any portions of the response plans that don't match with the consent decree or are not in line with it. Any statements or interpretations in the conceptual site model portion of the response activity plans, including the figures, cross sections, things like that, or any details regarding sampling procedures or protocols that were not included in the consent decree or those appendices of the consent decree. And those are really what are legally subject to change based on this comment period. So what's the investigation objective here for these investigation areas? So the requirements for the consent in the consent decree are laid out in section 7.9, little I, for areas 5, 6, 11, and 12. And some of those objectives are listed here. Define the vertical and horizontal extent of PFAS compounds contamination as required by Part 201. Part 201 is our environmental law here in Michigan that governs environmental investigations at contaminated sites. And so basically we need to understand where the PFAS is in the groundwater, both on a vertical scale and horizontal scale, so three-dimensionally within the groundwater aquifers. And then also to confirm and monitor the location and stability of the PFAS compounds once the plume has been defined. And then you'll find the consent decree requirements for Area 19 in 7.9 II. So again, we need to define the vertical and horizontal extent of PFAS in the groundwater within Area 19 and anything that potentially could be moving into Area 19. Wolverine is required to do at least one sampling event at each monitoring well in Area 19 once it's installed. And after that one sampling event within the interior wells, not the perimeter wells, but the interior wells, EGLE will then take over future sampling and maintenance of those monitoring wells. However, do note that any wells that are part of the overall perimeter well network, Wolverine will continue to monitor those on a quarterly basis in a long-term monitoring plan, which we'll talk about later on. Also, something to note is that Wolverine has obligations for residential well resampling and filter operation maintenance within these areas, all the filter areas within the North Kent study area. Those were discussed under separate response activity plans, which have gone through public comment periods and are posted on our Belmont, michigan.gov/Belmont website as well, if you're interested in looking at those. So these 4 response activity plans basically have the same format of each other. And really today we're going to focus in on, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the conceptual site model, which is section 2 of the 4 response activity plans. That, has discussions on topography, hydrogeology, hydrology, geology, PFAS distribution and groundwater, different data gaps as of the date of those reports that are missing. And then we're also going to focus in on a little bit more of the proposed statement of work. So where those initial borings and monitoring well clusters are proposed, and kind of zoom in on those to kind of explain those in a little bit more detail. So basically, there's 8 different sections within the text portion of the report, which is then followed by, the appendices of the tables, figures, the cross sections. There's also an Appendix A associated that just summarizes the groundwater sampling data that Wolverine collected over 4 quarters last year in 2019, just for reference. And also, something we wanted to kind of state at the get-go here, each monitoring well location that is proposed, if you read specifically in the response activity plans, is going to consist of multiple wells at one location set at different elevations and screen depths. So you'll see well clusters or nested sets of monitoring wells. That's all that's referring to. It's not just one monitoring well, it's multiple wells screened at that one location. So again, just a quick reminder before we dive into each area where we're at geographically. We're going to start with Area 5 here. That's, kind of located. Here's Post Drive. That kind of bisects the middle of Area 5, bordered to the west by US 131 down to Rogue River Road. Here's Jupiter bordering it to the east here. And then we'll go into Area 6, which is closer, just south of 10 Mile, kind of southeast of the House Street disposal site, on the east side of the House Street site. And then moving down to the southeast, areas 11 and area 12. We'll discuss those next. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to note here. Nope. All right, and now you will be able to hear from Mark. He's going to go into a little bit more detailed information about the geology specifically in Area 5.
So Area 5 is directly south of the House Street disposal area. Currently, we really haven't seen a great deal of impact in this area. However, we have kind of a lack of data because the parcels are relatively big and a number of the drinking water wells are set at the same elevation in this area. So there's a lot of unknowns with this. It isn't necessarily that we expect to be a great deal of impact in this area, but because of that lack of clarity, because we've relied solely on drinking water wells in this area, there are currently no monitoring wells. There are some questions that have to be answered to make sure that this area is safe to rely wholly on filters. There's still some question about how the impact to the historic area of Belmont, where that contamination originates, and some of the paleo drainage features that are evident that PFAS falls and closely follows in other areas are present in this area. And so some of these monitoring well locations will kind of vet that. And again, because we have no monitoring wells in Area 5 currently, we really have no data we can base potentiometric surface on. The contouring, the groundwater contouring and flow direction is based strictly on modeling, not on any actual data. And so these monitoring wells will also help give assurances that there's no unknown potential paths of plumes in this area. So, Karen, do you want to speak here or you want me to keep going?
You can go ahead. I was just changing it here so you can kind of see the northern boundary of Area 5 and the well fence that's being proposed.
So the white on these maps isn't necessarily non-detect. It's either low detect or non-detect. But as you can see on this figure, there's not a lot of impact in this area, but we are asking for, or we have negotiated for, these kind of rows of monitoring wells to kind of key in on the areas that would be of concern, or if there was an issue, these wells certainly would show that. And it would also help give definition on the potentiometric surface in this area as it relates to contamination in Belmont. Basically, how did it get from House Street to Belmont proper? And so to the north there, we kind of see a nice row of wells, and that will also be able to lead to development of highly detailed cross sections that aren't based on drinking water well data, but on actual environmental wells. Similarly, kind of that center circle, again, a cluster of wells to kind of give us an idea of, you know, if there were plumes that are reaching down that may parallel the main plumes that we're aware of, again, these wells would pick up on that and give us assurances that there's no impact that hasn't been encountered thus far. And then the wells to the south similarly will help aid into how that contamination distribution in that historic or the proper Belmont area is. Is there any other plumes that are arching down from House Street south and going southeast of that area, just so that, again, we can have assurances that that nothing is being missed. This area, I would expect to be a lot more straightforward than some of the other areas we're going to discuss. Some of the other areas get extremely complex from a geologic standpoint. This is, going to be interbedded clays, sands, but a little bit more straightforward than in some of the other areas.
Yep. And as we'll kind of go over a little bit later with the scheduling, once these wells are installed and sampled for 4 quarters, we're going to be able to look at that data and then figure out, in conjunction with any sort of residential well resampling data, what we're seeing here, where additional wells would need to be placed to further define and fill in any areas where we have missing data. So now we'll move to Area 6, which, if you remember, was just kind of east-southeast of the House Street disposal site, just on the east side of US 131.
So again, because House Street sits on a groundwater divide, we have flows in multiple direction. Because the disposal happened over a wide-ranging area of the property, and some of the methodology of disposal differed, we have these different plumes. We obviously have the major plume, which is the solid and the dashed lines, where you can see a lot of the impact is. And it's kind of following that super highway of 180, 200 feet of sand. That was the main conduit for most of the plumes. But we have some of these other plumes that we see illustrated by dashed lines more to the northeast. And we see impact there to the east, and that it's not readily clear how that, what exactly is going on. We can also see from the potentiometric surfaces, and this is represented by the light kind of gray or light blue lines, that flow is from House Street southeast in Area 6. And that's where most of the residential wells in this area are set. There are a few deeper, but the vast majority of residential wells are kind of set in the aquifer. So it's the wells here will be more of figuring out kind of that where the plumes are oriented, just in that kind of that sand superhighway, getting back into the mixed lithologies to the northeast of interbedded sands and clays, as well are there some of these other smaller plumes that just haven't been mapped. Either they're very narrow or not very long and in a real sense. They're maybe lower in, not as concentrated as some of the main plumes. However, with the lower criteria, the numbers are very low, so we have to be considerate of, are any of these other smaller plumes kind of impacting this Area 6?
Yeah, and something to note here, the little circles, just to clarify, are the residential well sampling locations. We have updated these figures to compare to the new criteria, which went into effect on August 3rd, 2020. So, you know, where before a red meant that it was over 70 parts per trillion for PFOA, PFOS. Now, if a well's historically ever been over 8 PFOA or 16 PFOS, it's now indicated as red. Just to kind of, for clarity purposes. The triangles are existing monitoring wells, so actual environmental wells that are installed in the area. And some of those have, you know, quite elevated concentrations. So we have some other colors of purple, black, and white to kind of note the elevated concentrations associated, you know, with the source area on House Street itself.
And I think also bringing up the monitoring wells, Karen, you see kind of a cluster of monitoring wells to the northeast on this figure. And those are wells around the North Kent landfill, and those are screened in a very shallow aquifer that not many drinking water wells are screened in. And that's why you see some of that impact there. That's the kind of the shallow aquifer that's immediately surrounding that landfill.
Yep. So here you'll see this is taken from figure 11 of the Area 6 response activity plan. We circled here in red the proposed, you know, initial round of monitoring wells, nested well clusters, and, you know, a lot of the ISO concentrations that are depicted on here, you know, showing the extent of the PFAS plume. Some of them are based on actual data points. The blue wells are existing wells, but some of it is also interpolation based on computer programming. So, you know, obviously this kind of area over here by North Kent landfill, you know, we have residential wells that are screened at similar elevations as over here that are non-detect. So again, it's just kind of getting some more monitoring wells in here to fill in the conceptual site model of how, you know, the low level contamination has been identified in Area 6 to further just kind of beef that up and understand that. So we have some wells proposed between Area 6 and the House Street site, as well as within Area 6 to get more information in there. Mark, did you want to go into any more detail about those and cross sections?
Sure. And I also want to iterate that the ISO contouring here is based on modeling, and some of these areas that are shown on this figure that shown as impacted, we're not aware of data that shows that there's impact there. It also shows that the main plume is discontinuous, which too doesn't make sense from a hydrogeologic standpoint. The three wells you see to the northwest will help kind of vet some of those small plumes that kind of go from House Street to the southeast towards the Rogue River. And again, the ones more to the south are kind of filling in the gaps to know where the next round of drilling will need to occur to clearly delineate the vertical and horizontal extent of PFAS in this area.
And something else to kind of note, you'll see different coloring of the monitoring wells as something as an investigation well or investigation and perimeter monitoring well. There's another response activity plan that we actually just received yesterday that was due on August 17th, and that's called the perimeter well response activity plan. And basically what that is, on the edges of the municipal water areas, receiving municipal water, or the edges of the North Kent study area in some portions, there's going to be a series of monitoring wells installed that are going to be kind of on the periphery or the perimeter of that area. So some of the wells that are installed as part of an area investigation within the North Kent study area, those wells are going to kind of double for purposes as monitoring on the edge of the municipal water area, as well as helping guide the investigation within those groundwater investigation areas. So that's why there you'll see in the legends on the figures kind of the little black circle with the yellow cross as kind of a investigation monitoring well, and then you'll see the green circles with the green triangle as sort of a proposed investigation and perimeter monitoring well. Just wanted to clarify that. And now moving south down the Rogue River to areas 11 and 12.
So areas 11 and 12 become some of the more complex areas geologically speaking, because we're starting to get into where plumes are interacting with the current Rogue River, but also the Paleo River channel. So we'd expect a lot of small sand and gravel channels there and become the preferential pathway of PFAS. But again, in the upper left is the House Street disposal area, and we see kind of that valley, that Paleo Valley. It's still, you can see it today. It's just the stream is very undersized for its feature, but that's where most of the main plumes are coming down to the southeast towards the Rogue River. And these plumes both interact with the Rogue River and in all likelihood undercut the Rogue River. I believe the work plan for areas 11, 12 specifically says that Wolverine does not believe that, but based on contaminant distribution, as well as the hydrogeology of the area, it's very, very, very unlikely that this plume would not cross underneath the Rogue River. And I base that somewhat on, again, the contaminant distribution, but also looking at the elevations of contamination in the monitoring well 20 set versus the distance from that area to the Rogue River, that the upward head for it to not undercut the Rogue River would be numbers I don't believe can exist naturally in nature without some major anthropologic influence. So area 12, again, and 11, again, we're getting into this kind of the current Rogue River, the paleo setting of the Rogue River. So it's going to be very complex, and these plumes are probably going to be very narrow and sinuous once you get in there. So when you look at areas like the Rapid Fall neighborhood and you look at that contamination distribution, it initially doesn't make a lot of sense until you think of that setting, and then you can kind of see that sinuous nature. And similarly down in area 11, where the Rogue River is going to empty into the Grand River, again, you have a little bit more complex setting, but certainly these plumes not only, again, interact with the Rogue River, but are undercutting the Rogue River. We can also look at potential source areas up gradient of 12 and 11 to the northeast, and there's simply not. There is a site to the east that has PFAS impact, but that flow is south, and some of that was anthropologically influenced. Also, that flow would not impact this area based on the current understanding of the potentiometric surface, the hydrogeology of this area. So if you want to go to the next screen, Karen, to show the wells. So again, these wells are going to help aid in that understanding. Looking at where east of the Rogue River, where that impact is in the Rapid Fall neighborhood, there's going to be kind of a line of monitoring wells, so we'll get a good idea. Those will be nested sets. Wells to the east, again, to help illustrate that there's not impact coming from other sources, and then wells to the south that will help, again, have that understanding of what that plume is doing in this area. Again, because this area is so complex, I would expect this to be the first of several mobilizations for installation of monitoring wells, that this isn't going to be an area that's easy to resolve with one or two mobs, that it will be several events or mini monitoring wells to delineate the horizontal and vertical extent of impact in this area.
Yep. So now we're moving up to, area 19. That's right now kind of between the 11 mile and 12 mile. It's also referred to as the Woven Northeast and Summit area sampling, groundwater sampling areas. So we're moving up north of 10 mile. And as Mark will explain, this area is definitely even more complex than south of 10 mile, and you'll see that in the initial phase, just a number of borings and kind of what we have, what we know so far, and what's still to be understood about the hydrogeology and contaminant bait and transport within Area 19.
So the Woven Jewel source area, again, was a disposal area, and we, again, on a groundwater divide, so we have flow in many directions. So we have pretty significant, if not the major plume going to kind of the west to northwest towards the Rogue River. We have some very significant plumes going to the southeast, but we also have these plumes going to the northeast into Area 19. And basically, from a hydrogeologic standpoint, this really can be the only source of impact in Area 19. But as Karen said, this is probably the most geologically complex of any part of the study area. It's very, a lot of interbedded sands and clays. You'll hit some major sand channels, some minor sand channels that are conduits for the PFAS and paleo drainage features. But you also run into these massive clays that help orient. So kind of where Karen has her marker now going on those plumes, from a geologic standpoint, I get geeky about this area. That on Elsinore, we see in the north end of Elsinore, massive clays to bedrock. There's simply no sand, so there's no conduit for that PFAS. But we see that major, that kind of a little bit more major plume that goes northeast into the the Area 19 study area. And again, it goes from those massive clays into this nice thicker sand channel that any well that's been installed in that, drinking water well that's been installed in that, has been impacted. So, and then we have these plumes that go kind of to the northeast, are following more shallow paleo features. If you were to look at detailed cross sections kind of across the North Wellington Ridge area, we start to see these just very small sand channels. Some of these plumes are only maybe 20, 30 feet wide and very narrow. They're just following these small historic stream channels. And that's been a pathway up into the Area 19. So there's going to be a significant number of monitoring wells to fully delineate this area. And again, so when we look at the first proposal of monitoring wells, yes, there's a lot of wells there, but in my head, I think I've seen many times locations as proposed here. And maybe a better illustration of that is both EGLE and Wolverine installed wells on Summit, and we missed the plume. We both missed the plume. We both made our best guess, and we missed the plumes. Even though we know there's several plumes that cross Summit, it's going to be very difficult to delineate that vertical and horizontal extent. So again, we kind of see a larger number of wells in this area, but because of that complexity, because of the number of plumes that are transversed to this area, it's going to be an upward road to fully delineate this area.
Yeah, and something else to kind of take into account is just, if we go back a slide, you know, we have the Rogue River, which basically is encircling this area, especially Area 19. So, you know, as we're getting closer to the Rogue River here, we just have, you know, a lot of different coarsening and fining sequences as you get close to the river's edge that we're dealing with, that you know aren't necessarily dealing with further inland in the actual source area. So just its location geomorphologically, you know, within this kind of you know, alluvial fluvial plain is definitely making it more difficult to model. So it will be an iterative approach. You know, this will give us some good cross sections to be able to work with. You know, we work with GZA to figure out these locations where it would be, you know, the best starting point to get this information, and then we'll kind of go from there to see where it would make the most sense based on the data to step out and further define what's going on. You know, there will be ongoing residential well resampling and continued filter maintenance in this area. And again, you'll notice the perimeter wells. This actually should be a perimeter well. There's a couple more that are actually perimeter wells too that will be used, not just the internal ones, but those will be sampled multiple quarters long term, kind of on the edge of the area. The pink wells are just existing monitoring well clusters that currently already exist that have been installed by Wolverine. So those will aid with some additional data as well. And just kind of for all of these response activity plans, for all 4 of them, you'll see within the anticipated schedule section of the reports, you know, there's different time frames with obtaining access, but the longest one is 16 months. So with over the next year and 4 months, you know, I know Wolverine's already been working on obtaining access once the consent decree was approved on some of these locations. They'll kind of be working, they'll be jumping from place to place within each area, within the North Kent study area, wherever they can get access first. So they'll prioritize locations where access has been given. So hopefully the drill crew and field crew can just keep going, keep chugging them out. You know, if they do happen to get a lot of access, they can have multiple crews out at once, which they've done before when they were doing work both on and off site, the tannery and House Street. You know, they actually, I think at least one time had 4 different crews going. So it's really just going to depend on getting that access and getting those well clusters in. But that's the timeline that's included within the work plans. After completion and 4 quarters of sampling of these well clusters, as written in the consent decree, GZA will then meet with EGLE to discuss placement of additional well clusters that are needed to meet the requirements of the consent decree, that vertical and horizontal definition, or perimeter monitoring as well. And something to note in section 7.12 within the consent decree that discusses the completion reports, they're called. And so these are due no later than 5 years following the effective date of the consent decree, which was February 19th, 2020. So by February 19th, 2025, basically this full definition and work within these areas will need to be completed and documented and summarized within this completion report that is submitted to EGLE for our review and approval. And within that completion report as well, there's language in there that discusses the long-term monitoring plan, specifically for areas 5, 6, 11, and 12. And then the perimeter well network will also have its own long-term monitoring well plan. So that's kind of going to be discussed in those completion reports. So if folks are like, hey, what about the long-term sampling? That's kind of where that comes in to be documented. So as we've discussed in previous public meetings that we've had, we'll be taking comments from the public through September 10th, 2020 on these 4 response activity plans. You can email them to our House Street email box at egle-rrd-housestreet@michigan.gov. Or you can mail them in, and I'll give the district address in a moment. Again, through September 10th, 2020. Once the public comment period ends, we will prepare a response document that summarizes and addresses the public comments that we have received. And those will be posted on our michigan.gov/Belmont website as well. We currently have the GSI response activity plan and the filter operation and maintenance summaries listed on that website as well right now. So we previously had those public comment periods, and those are processes kind of wrapping up. So those can be found there. Similar thing will happen with this as we move on. And then once we receive all the public comments, we digest them, we're able to incorporate them where able and where needed. We send Wolverine any edits or comments that we have on the response activity plans. And we send that to them in a letter, which, you know, we post on our website as well. So as you can see, quite a lot of plans and meetings and whatnot has been happening this summer. COVID-19 can't stop this work from happening. We've been trudging along and having virtual meetings instead of in person. So, you know, this meeting is being recorded, so folks who couldn't make it tonight can watch it at their leisure. As you can see right now, we're in area 5, 6, 11, 12, and R1 or 19, you know, public meeting date, and then our comment period is through September 10th. The last plan we have, we received yesterday on August 17th in the evening. So we're working to get that posted up on our website like we have for all the rest. On the michigan.gov/Belmont website. And since we're currently in a public comment period, we're gonna let that sit on our website for people to look at, and then figure out a public meeting date that makes sense, and give people time to finish this public comment period before we jump into another public comment period, because that would be a lot of public comments at once for everyone. So just wanted to kind of let everyone know the whole picture of what's been going on. And again, all of these are posted on our House Street website if you're interested in looking at the other plans and the various stages that those are in right now. You can continue to submit your written comments during this public comment period on these response activity plans to the EGLE-RRD-housestreet@michigan.gov website, or you can submit them by mail to myself, Karen Vorse, at EGLE-RRD, that stands for Remediation and Redevelopment Division. Our address downtown Grand Rapids is 350 Ottawa Avenue Northwest, Unit 10. And that's Grand Rapids, Michigan 49503. When you're submitting comments, especially on these response activity plans, please just identify which plan you are submitting a comment on, just because they're all very similar, and we want to make sure we know exactly which area you have your comments on. And you know, if you have any questions or just want to talk with Mark and I and get more additional information, you can email me at vorcek, VORCEK @michigan.gov, or you can call me on my work cell, which is 616-439-8008, and we can, you know, set up a call between myself and Mark and anyone and go over any questions you have. So I think we'll hand it back over to Les for some future instructions on the next portion of tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Mark. We'll give you a chance to catch your breath there, get a glass of water, and I am going to change screens here for a moment. while we talk about bring up the how to ask a question. So before I bring the panelists on, I just wanted to remind everyone how you can ask questions for tonight during the question and answer portion of the meeting. Again, you can use the questions box located in the webinar control panel, and you can also raise your hand, the little hand with the green up arrow to raise your hand, and I'll see you and unmute your phone so you can ask a question of the panelist. Tonight's panelist for the remainder of this evening, you've met two of them already. That's Karen Vorse and Mark Worrell from the EGLE Remediation Redevelopment Division's EGLE Remediation Redevelopment Division. Joining them will be Abby Hendershot, the District Supervisor for Remediation Redevelopment Division in Grand Rapids, and Danielle Allison Yoakum from the Michigan Department of Attorney General. So those will be our panelists for this evening. And if you guys will all turn your cameras on so we can see you, that'd be great. And while we're waiting for our panelists to join us, here they are. We have a question. We have a hand raised from one of our attendees. Okay, just a moment. I'm going to do that. Okay. All right, Mr. Richard, I'm going to unmute your line. If you can unmute your line. Okay, Richard, you there?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm asking questions on behalf of the Rockford or the Wolverine CAG, and this is Rick Radisky. I have the same concerns that I guess Mark mentioned. A lot of the plumes are drawn being discontinuous and isolated, and I feel based on what you've been showing that they should be connected. So we're going to have similar comments as the last time. Area 12 is right across the river from the Plainfield Township water plant. And I was wondering if there's any concern about that plume going underneath the Grand River. There's no wells that are put, no perimeter wells or no monitoring wells that are adjacent to the Grand River. And I'm also concerned, since they're pulling water for the township out of that gravel aquifer there, if pumping is going to pull that plume underneath the Grand River. So is any concerns about that, or is any investigation going to be done to see if there's any connection?
Do you want to comment on that, Mark, with any of your information you've had? Yeah, he's got to unmute himself.
Yeah.
Oops, can you unmute him, Les?
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, he looks frozen.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't the one that muted me. I don't know how that happened. So yeah, I mean, that is a concern. And again, I want to point out, just because there's not wells on the map now doesn't mean that there won't be maps in the future. This is the first step. And we're kind of going back to where we know there's plume based on either other monitoring wells or in area 12, speaking specifically, kind of areas where we already have Wolverine monitoring wells, or we have residential impact, and we'll work our way down. I'd say I don't know if the plume undercuts the Grand River. There's no monitoring wells that say it does or does not. The Plainfield Township wells have been tested and they haven't been shown high impact. So I mean, that's a good. But yeah, I think that will have to be part of that. one of the future steps. And again, areas 11 and 12, along with area 19, they're so complex that there's going to have to be several mobilizations to figure this out. Well, they'll have to install this set of monitoring wells, get the data back, figure out, kind of figure out where within the aquifer it's impacted. Did we hit it? Did they simply miss the plume because it's too narrow in that area? And I still have a lot of questions. Again, I'm going to step back to, it's going to be a lot further up gradient, but monitoring well 20 is impacted at depth pretty significantly. That's 2,800 to 3,000 feet away from the Rogue River. Wolverine did install a well at that depth at the Rogue River, but it was really kind of side gradient of where you'd expect that plume to be, kind of further east than maybe had been proposed and paperwork to the agency. And so for it to not undercut the Rogue River, that means that that plume would have to rise something like 30 to 35 feet in 3,000 feet. And that's pretty significant. That's a pretty significant upward head for that plume to take that I just don't think is going to happen in a natural setting. So, there's going to have to be additional iterations, additional well locations. And again, you got to take the first steps. You got to install those first monitoring wells. They're in good locations right now, but then based on that, we'll have to, they'll have to further delineate that vertical and horizontal extent. And part of that will be what's happening down there more towards the Grand River.
Yeah.
Okay. I realize that there's going to be multiple phases in the future. It's just, I am concerned that it might be going under the river, and we're looking at long-term, Plainfield being the source of the water, and we should have a very rigorous wellhead protection program and know exactly, what is recharging that well field for the future. So, okay, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Rick, just to add on to that, Plainfield Township water is still on a regular monitoring program for PFAS quarterly. So, that testing's being done. If there's any change, we'll know it not only from this set of data that Wolverine is going to start providing us through the investigation data, but also through that regular monitoring program that's already being done. So we'll be watching it from several different fronts, from several different points in our agency, and we'll know if something changes significantly that's going to make a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a written question that's come in, and it has two parts. The first part of the question is there any assistance set up for homeowners or buyers to test drinking water?
There's no specific assistance per se, but there are many opportunities for homeowner to get their well tested if they are concerned about PFAS. We have the EGLE drinking water lab that can do it for a fairly reasonable price. I think Karen was at $290.
Yeah, and I'd caveat it too with if they're located in this investigation area. We have historic well tests, and there will be additional resampling occurring. So if you're living in the sampling area, reach out to us or reach out to your contact at Wolverine's environmental consultant who's reached out to you previously, so we can discuss if you're in line to get another sample, what historically has been the sample. But if you're in an area outside, I'm not sure if this resident is just somewhere else in North Kent County that's outside of this area.
Right.
On our MPART website, Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, there is information for private well owners. If they own a well, there's different labs in the state of Michigan that are offering PFAS testing. There's also some community groups in Michigan that are offering testing, and that information's on the MPART website. But feel free to give us a call so we can talk about where you're at. We may have information on the area that we can share with you, talk over if we have any known sources, and things like that. So you can give us a call and we can hopefully talk through that before you order sampling your well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you actually answered the second part of that question. So very good. Thank you, panelists. Next question is coming from Mr. Jonathan. Mr. Jonathan, I'm going to unmute your line. You can unmute your line. There you go.
All right.
There you go.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yep.
Thank you, Karen and Mark, for another great presentation. I'm so glad you're doing this work. Mark, you said that you think that the main plume crosses under the Rogue River, and that you don't think Wolverine believes that yet. I'm wondering how and when that will be resolved, and what are the ramifications? That seems to be heading over toward Boulder Creek. So how will that be resolved, and what are the ramifications?
So the reason I said that I don't think Wolverine believes that is because they actually state that in these work plans, that it is not. And again, the state strongly disagrees with that. So that will be resolved by this drilling in the area 11 and 12. Simply that, specifically the area 11, that will resolve it. Wells installed in the right location at the right depth, that will resolve it, and that's what it's going to take. Again, and we base, the reason we're saying what we are is we look at that contaminant distribution, we look at other potential sources, we look at the hydrogeologic setting, we look at what we know between the Rogue River and House Street, the depth of the monitoring wells, the depth of some of the residential wells. And that's why, I'm kind of bold in that statement without a well set right in the heart of the plume at the river. But again, just based on the hydrogeology of the area and the fact that we have that contamination east of the river. And when I said we talk about that main plume, it's at several different elevations. That's it's 180 to 200 feet of sand back at House Street. It's kind of like a super highway for contamination, especially PFAS, to take towards the Rogue River. And so it's not just in other areas where we have that kind of interbedded clay and sands. We do end up with some very fine, a little bit more finely tuned, if you will, vertical sense of contamination, because we can say, well, there's this narrow aquifer, from 740 to 720, and then there's a clay, and so there's not PFAS, beneath that, and then we get a little bit deeper, there may be some PFAS. But where that main plume comes through, it's just a sandbox. And so, basically, to follow through on Wolverine's plan, that plume needs to go from tens and tens of feet of thickness to narrow up to about 10 feet in 3,000 feet. And without the lack of some other geologic consideration or anthropologic consideration, that's probably not going to happen. And it will resolve that ultimately with the wells in the area 11. I'm pretty confident they'll show impact at the appropriate depths. Now, going further east, we don't expect the plume to kind of cross some of the Rogue River and parallel Grand River upstream. What's going to happen most likely is it's going to cross from the Rogue River, and then it's going to want to get pulled by the Grand River, the hydrogeology of the Grand River, and it's going to get pulled south to kind of parallel the Rogue River until that Rogue River, Grand River plume interface happens. And again, there's just additional drilling that's going to happen to figure that out.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I think we have another question for the panelists. Sandy, I'm going to unmute your line. Sandy, go ahead.
All right. I don't understand much of what you're saying, but Mark seems to, and Karen does, so that's good. My question, and I know Rick and Jonathan do, so that's good too. But my question is, if you find that this is in fact going under the Rogue, I'm assuming it would impact other wells farther away. And as you find things in the other areas that you're going to be doing more and more investigating, is the public going to be notified of this, or how do we get that word out to the community if you find more issues?
So the wells that are in that area 12 have already, been tested and are sampled. And so it's really just kind of defining within that area where the contamination is and marking that out with wells. But let's say we have an issue where There's unknown. We have a section in the consent decree for unknown issues of something that comes up, and let's say there's a whole new area that's impacted that no one ever knew about. We had no wells. It's this totally unknown issue. There's then a process that we would take to investigate that and follow up on that. So it would be, you know, residents would be notified, hey, we need to step out over here and sample your well and continue that process, similar to what's been done up to this point. But so far we don't anticipate the, you know, exterior boundaries changing very much. It's just kind of fine tuning what's on the inside. And then if there's any like major unknowns that no one knew about, if we discover that, then those have to be addressed. Kind of similar to Rick's question, you know, interaction with the Grand River and things like that. If we were ever to get information that shows it going a completely different direction than what we know now, we'd have to discuss that with Wolverine and then follow up on that. I hope that answered your question, but let us know if it didn't.
Can I add one thing too?
Yeah.
So the other thing that this will help with, again, like Karen said, the wells kind of in these areas have been sampled, but because these areas aren't getting municipal water, there's the potential of replacement wells, there's potential of new builds, and then we can avoid installing a well into one of these highly impacted areas, a new drinking water well into one of these highly impacted areas. And we can also then avoid cross-contamination or connecting parts of the aquifer that weren't previously connected with new drilling for either new builds or replacement wells. And that's a big part of this, is that it's not just looking at the drinking water wells that are now, but since these areas aren't getting municipal water, these monitoring wells will aid greatly in Kent County Health Department's decision and advice that EGLE gives them in installation of new drinking water wells in those areas.
Mm-hmm. And Sandy, would it help to bring the map back up just so you can look at the map a little bit more about that area? Because I think from your comments, it sounds like you're thinking that as these monitoring wells are installed, that there might be new areas discovered for drinking well water impacts. And I don't think that's really going to be the case. We've pretty much defined the extent of those wells that we would expect to be impacted based on Mark's geological and Karen's investigations. That is, yes. So if you go down to like 11 and 12, whoops, go back one.
Yeah, I have a small, you know, my pea-sized brain understood part of that. I think I was listening closely to what Rick was saying about if this starts impacting where Plainfield Township, for instance, is drawing water, or like Mark said about new wells maybe that are going to go in, or replacement wells for people that don't have municipal water. I just want to make sure we have a system so that in the future, the public is notified when we find this, so that they're not in the boat that we were in with this. So that's all
Right.
Big picture that I'm looking at on this.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is this is not a new plume. This is not going to have drastically changed. This has been going on for, you know, since they start depositing the stuff there in the 60s. So this should be a fairly stable plume. So we don't expect it to change directions. What we need to do is, like Mark said, is to fine tune exactly where it's at, what depth in the vertical sense, and also in the, you know, your XY coordinates, where is it, so that we can have that better definition to aid in future well placements if that's necessary. And the same thing with the Plainfield Township wells. We didn't expect anything to change, but as they continue to monitor and as we get additional investigative data, it'll help us in the long run about future decisions that need to be made.
And also keep in mind that EGLE makes all of this information available online. So any of the data that's being collected, all of the information that will be accumulated from Wolverine will be available to the public. And if there's any human health risk at all that has not already been addressed, I'm sure that EGLE will be reaching out.
Okay. presently don't have any new hands raised, and we have no new questions in the question box. While we're waiting for additional questions, oh wait, I have a question. There is a question. There's a question coming in from Scott. Go ahead, Scott.
Oops.
Scott?
You unmuted?
He's unmuted. He's self-muted. Okay, Scott, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, well, while we're waiting for Scott, what I want to share with the attendees is that I've placed some information in the chat box for you, some resource information. I've put in the web address to the michigan.gov/Belmont website for you. And I've also included the EGLE YouTube channel where we have been posting not only the webinar recordings from these past reviews of the response activity plans, but all of the EGLE public meeting webinar recordings are also posted there. So you may find some other items that might be of interest to you. I've included that also in the chat for your use. Scott, are you there? Okay, Scott has lowered his hand, so.
You can email me. My email address is there, or give me a call after.
Right.
Sometime this next week too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we have another question, I think. We had a question that looks like it was started in the question box, but it stopped. So,
Okay.
Do you have any other panelists? Do you have any other information you'd like to share or reiterate to the attendees?
Oh, we appreciate all their time and the interaction and the good questions. We appreciate it. It makes it feel like everyone was engaged and listening. I'm not just talking to a computer to nowhere. Yeah, we look forward to getting your comments. You have till September 10th. And if you just want to informally, nothing, being recorded, if you just want to informally talk to us about anything that you didn't feel comfortable bringing up tonight, you're more than welcome to reach out to us after this meeting.
Okay.
Yep. The other thing, Les, I'll just throw in is I know there's been a lot of real estate transactions going on in the area. So if anybody has moved in new to the area and didn't realize that their house was on a sampling schedule or just wants more information, again, as Karen said, reach out to us, and happy to share that information before you decide to start testing on your own. You may already be included, or we may have information in your area that could be helpful. So give us a call.
Okay, I'm going to try to unmute Ryan. Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I just had a question. So first of all, my name is Ryan Coe. I'm currently a engineering project manager at a local furniture company, and I'm just been reaching out and learning where I want to take the next step in my career. And I'm wondering, do you guys know of any companies or anyone locally who is looking for engineers who are looking to resolve a lot of the problems that we have discussed today, whether it be installing monitoring wells and stuff like that? Do you guys have any feedback you could give to me to where I could go to take the next steps to try to help these companies to implement the monitoring wells or any other solutions that you guys are in need of resolving right now?
Yeah. Why don't you, Ryan, why don't you reach out to Karen's email here, and you can send her your email address and we can give you the contacts that we have on our end. Because
Okay.
Environmental companies that we deal with the most, and depending on your qualifications and stuff, I know despite the economy, there still are some firms that are still looking to try to replace people. So
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you so much, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you guys
Thank
so much
you.
for everything you're doing. I've been doing a lot of research, even just over the last few days of researching everything that you guys have put out, all the content and everything that's even on YouTube and such. And it's really inspiring, and it's really great to see that you guys have such a strong foundation already established for someone like myself. I just graduated at Ferris State University, like I said, and it's really inspiring to see, like I said, so many people who are so dedicated to doing what you guys are doing. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
I have to unmute myself. We have no new hands raised at the moment, and we have no new questions.
Okay.
Any final thoughts?
Enjoy dinner.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have ESC Karen's contact information. Again, the public comment period ends on September 10th. You can email your comments to eagle-rrd-housestreet@michigan.gov, or you can send written comments by mail to Karen Vorse at the EGLE's Grand Rapids District office, and the address is here on the screen. This will conclude tonight's webinar. The webinar will be made available in a few days after it's closed captioned, and you should receive an email letting you know when it is available. And with that, we thank you for spending the evening with us, and you have a wonderful evening.
Okay. Thank you.